Hey everybody out there, my name is Dragnix, and I'm going to discuss a little bit today about review scores, and in particular, some controversy that's sort of come up, and some discussion that's come up on Twitter as well as Penny Arcade regarding review scores in relation to Mad Max. I will put some Mad Max footage in the background here. I am still formally going to review the game. That's going to probably come out on Friday. That may delay the X-Blades video just because I want to get that done, and of course that would be a giveaway with that, but let's get into the meat of the subject here, which is review scores on Mad Max in particular. Now, some discussion has come up regarding Mad Max, in particular with this strong disparity of review scores, and I think Penny Arcade is where this sort of started here. I'm going to read a section of Penny Arcade here for you guys to sort of set the mood in terms of the discussion here. So it is only when there is a strong disparity of review scores that I take serious notice. I don't entirely know what purpose it serves giving Mad Max a 5, but I don't believe it's correlated in any way with the product. I think that this number is a tool designed to make me talk about the review, and I have taken the bait because I'm tired and it made me angry. One may say this number is an index of someone's personal experience, and therefore can't be wrong, but that reasoning can be likened to a pirate's cove, where villains take refuge. If the number only refers to the interior geometry of your skull, unmoored from any shared consciousness, maybe numbers are not for you. Maybe you should score games using the names of bones. Maybe you should score games using Nordic women's names exclusively. Maybe this game is a Solvik, but this one is more of an Adelborg. I could quit the game tomorrow and wouldn't be anything akin to a 5. You can fire the harpoon once, just one time, hauling a sniper from his perch down into the hot sand, and once the frenzy high-fiving has ceased, you might feel the game has already earned its keep. Now, I've seen discussions from others regarding like Jim Sterling and some of the bigger review sites regarding this, and there's been backlash regarding some of the low scores that the game has gotten. In particular, it seems to be very different from the user scores. The user scores are very high compared to the game's Metacritic score. If I look at the Metacritic score right now in terms of let's just use the PS4 version, the review score is averaging a 70, which is actually not that great in terms of the overall game. However, if I look at the user reviews, it is pretty much entirely positive. So what causes that? And I think that's where you have to sort to understand what the causation for that is more than anything else in where reviews are useful and not. Now, the thing is that when I look at the lower review scores of this game, and in particular, I'm gonna cite two. I'm going to cite the Jimquisition's review, and I'm going to cite the Polygon review. And I know for those who probably watch the channel, Polygon is not exactly someone who I agree with almost all the time, but I took a look at the Polygon review, and I gave it a 50. I did not give it a very good score. And the elements that it cites within the review in terms of where the game succeeds and where the game fails, I think are very, very honest. I think that things like the biggest problem with Mad Max's combat is that it never really changes. I think that's true. I think the fact of the matter is that the combat, even with the upgrades of skills and some introduction of other elements, the combat pretty much stays the same. And once you get those upgrades in the game, combat becomes less of a problem more than anything else. It actually sort of is a distraction more than anything else. It's not a core part of the gameplay. And I think there are elements within both of these reviews, like the Jimquisition review, where, yeah, it's completely on point in terms of some of the things there. Let me take a look here in terms of some of the summaries that Mr. Sterling made. There's simply no reason to pick it up, however, if you've yet to try The Witcher 3, Shadow of Mordor, or Batman Arkham City. There are tons of better games that go for what Mad Max went for and do it so in a superior manner. When it comes to simply chewing through yet another open-world game, Mad Max does suffice. It's a substandard but largely competent AAA game in a sea full of them. And those who do value the idea of content above anything else will find their money's worth here. Again, he's very specific about some of the elements in terms of there's a lot to do. it's competent, but the fact that it is substandard in terms of others. And that he goes on to say, the characters are not, the greatest of characters in this. They didn't really do a lot of his story well in terms of using the sort of Mad Max license. Now, what could cause this? Well, first of all, I think one of the biggest problems I see regarding these review scores, and in particular, not necessarily against the review scores themselves, but the sort of criteria reviving around review scores and reviews, was the actual gameplay in question in terms of timeliness. One of the things I've noticed, especially with games like this, is the fact that when you have a game, especially an open world game, and you have to review it, time is not your friend, especially as a industry professional. What do I mean by that? Well, remember, if you were doing this as a real job, as a honest to God, I'm doing this for a living, timeliness in terms of reviews make a huge difference. And I've mentioned that on this channel before. Now, you're probably saying, well, why isn't your review out? Well, you have to sort of balance that with, are you giving the game fair justice? And in terms of Mad Max, I felt like the game doesn't do well in terms of just sort of blazing through it in terms of an 8, 10, 12-hour experience. I talked a little bit about this on Skilled's channel regarding Metal Gear Solid 5 and its reviewed events, and I'll put a link in the description below. But it is that situation where the sort of monotony of the game, and don't get me wrong, Mad Max has a lot of monotony. You're going to be doing a lot of the same thing. You'll be pulling down scarecrows in the game. You'll be battling people hand-to-hand combat. You'll be doing a lot of the same thing. And when you're doing that for like an 8-10 hour period at a time, it's going to cause problems because, when you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, of course the game's not going to stick out to you. It's going to feel stale. But if you're sort of summing up in like 1 hour, 2 hour bursts, the game will feel a little bit more fresh. You sort of have a cooling down period in terms of the review, and you can go back to it and still enjoy the combat. You aren't necessarily feeling like you're getting the same experience over and over again because you're getting right back into it later on when you've maybe done something else. And I think that's a major problem with releasing an open world game with such a short embargo. Now, embargoes are useful in the gaming world. I know that people have sort of like, embargoes really hurt the consumer. Embargoes are useful in a couple of ways. The idea of embargoes are that everyone gets a fair shot at the game in terms of reviewing it, but that it's not necessarily rushed if done properly. Very much embargoes are a tool, very similar to review scores. They're a tool. The thing with tools is if you don't use them in the proper way, of course, they can be incorrectly used and cause problems. And I think part of the problem here was that the game in question, Mad Max, was released in a manner that didn't make a lot of sense. There was a very short period in terms of reviews. The review copies went out late, and people only really had a day or two to really play through the game without, if you wanted to be the first one to get to the reviews up and, for the public to see, which makes a difference in a business run model. So, of course, you're playing through the game, straight through, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 hours. And, of course, that also was compounded with the fact that Metal Gear Solid 5 came out, which, of course, everybody was looking forward to. So that didn't help. You may have rushed it even more, given that. But that sort of gives a little bit of a problem there. You have a game that isn't necessarily indicative to the review system in question. It's not very, very strongly aligned with the fact that it's supposed to be played in this, rush style manner. It's actually probably better if the game is played, off and on. And I think that's where the first problem occurs here. The second problem occurs is something that I think is a little bit more problematic, and I think it's the idea of uniqueness. Now, don't get me wrong. Uniqueness is a huge portion of games. A game has to stand out from its brethren. I've always mentioned the fact that if a game has a unique feature that hasn't been done before, and it's, okay in other places, but not necessarily better, but if it has that one element to it where, it drives you to want to play the game, then of course you're going to want to play that game. But in terms of review score, that becomes a little bit more interesting because, Mad Max is on the other side of that. Now, you've got some uniqueness, I guess, in the harpoon and things like that, but it feels like it's been done before. Games like Twisted Metal, games like, car chasing games like that. I don't want to say Burnout because I don't think that's a very good comparison, but I think you understand where I'm going with that. Where the car combat, even though it's unique enough, it feels like it's been done before. Not to say that Mad Max has problems with it. It doesn't have problems with it, I should say. Mad Max does have a lot of problems with it, but in terms of the issues with the game itself, in terms of its gameplay, it's competent. And I think that's where a lot of reviews are giving it, lower scores. It's competent but doesn't shine. Now, when does a review score become a comparison between two things? A lot of review scores, especially in the lower ends of the review scores, have compared it against other games and said, look, it just doesn't stand out compared to them. But is that a real good, competent, criteria in terms of the score? Should the game be compared to others in terms of it standing out for a review score in particular, or should the game stand on its own merits? Again, you've said the game is competent. You said the game is, solid in terms of, the gameplay, in terms of, the basics of the game. But it doesn't stand out, so is it necessarily a good game at that point? But that's when things start to fall apart. Again, a game probably should be judged on its own merits. The game should be judged for what it is. Is it competent technically? Is it gameplay standout? Did you have fun with the game? Did you enjoy the story and everything like that? Not necessarily, I had fun with the game, but I had more fun with Shadow of Mordor, or I had more fun with Batman Arkham City. Now, those comparisons will always be made, and I think there needs to be sort of this understanding that a review score doesn't necessarily mean a sales score. I think that's part of the perception here, is the fact that a lot of people use review scores as an idea of, I'm going to buy this now, or I'm going to buy this later, or I'm going to buy it on sale. But I never really sort of been one to sort of write along those lines. The thing is that depending on your finances, depending on what you're looking for in a game at that point, even a game like Bayonetta 2, even a game like, let's say Metal Gear Solid 5, may not be right for you at this time. But very similar to what Jim Sterling says at the end of his review on his site, it's probably worth getting many months from now when all your good games are played and the price tag is severely reduced. That gives a condition of when to buy the game. And I think that's separate from the review score itself. The thing is that the game is fun enough to warrant a purchase at some point. But right now, compared to everything else out there, you probably want to hold off. Right now, for me, Mad Max is sitting somewhere between a 6 and a 7 in terms of the gameplay. And the thing is that with that said, I don't know if I can necessarily say go spend $60 on it. Now, that could change as the gameplay goes along, but I mean, it's part of the situation where money is a resource. It's the fact of the matter is not everybody has the money to be able to spend, on multiple AAA titles in 1 month. And understanding that is a huge difference for the, average gamer, even though I may give the game a 7, for example, does that necessarily mean that you should go purchase it right now? No. Now, at one point, on this channel, I did experiment with the review scores, and I experimented with the idea. And if you go look at like my Bayonetta review or my Evil Within review, that maybe there needs to be a different type of score in terms of a buyability score. The idea being that there are certain circumstances and certain criteria for a score that I think people want. I think people really want a very simple idea of, is this game right for me? And is this game, worth my time right now, or maybe a little bit later down the road? And I think that's what review scores have turned into. And I think that's not necessarily what review scores are right now. I think people use them for that resource, but unfortunately, you have to say, again, give the game its credit and due. Does the game play well? Does the game play all right? Does the game play poorly? That doesn't necessarily translate into a buyability score all the time. Sure, you would think that a game that's fun would automatically be a purchase. That's not necessarily the case. Again, you have to understand that compared to everything else out there, another game could be funner or do it better, but it doesn't necessarily take away from that game in terms of an overall perception of how good the game is. It's just that it may not be worth your purchase at this time, and I think that's where the big underlying controversy here is. Mad Max is a game that I'm having fun with, but I can't recommend it at this time due to the fact that I just don't think the cost is worth it compared to everything else out there. Now, with that said, if you like open worlds, if you like car combat, if you like, sort of side characters who really enhance the experience in terms of, sort of a chip on your shoulder, a little parrot on your shoulder, sort of, squawking at you, then this game is for you, and you probably should go and get it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a score of a 6 or 7 or 8 should translate into everyone, X amount of people buy it. It's all related onto your personal wants of the game. And I think that's where, again, review scores fall apart and why people have problems with review scores. In the end, I think one of the major things that need to come out of this is the fact that when it comes down to review scores, again, are a tool. They are a tool that, when used properly, can be useful. They can be useful in terms of if you highlight yourself with the reviewer in question, if you found yourself agreeing with what they've done in the past in terms of games that you've played and experiences that you've had, then their review score means a lot more. But just basing your purchasing decision off a review score and not the context in which that review score has been taken is a very, very bad idea, because the context is what makes that score important, and people need to realize this. And I understand that review scores for some seem like, okay, it's not giving the game its credit and its due. That's true in some ways, but you also have to understand the nature of the consumer. The consumer wants information fast. They want information to come out very quickly and in an easy, accessible form. And I think that's the review score right now. Hopefully we can get to a point where games are so complicated and games are so ingrained into media that we can talk more about the details more than anything else in the basic limelight, that's right, in the basic light of, everyone, in terms of, I want to know what this game specifically does as an average consumer, as an average gamer, not necessarily a hardcore gamer, not necessarily a gamer who buys, 3 to 4 games a month, reasonably priced games. All right. I've talked about this a little bit. I know this is a different video from Monday, but I did want to sort of get my thoughts out there. So I will see you all later. Expect the Mad Max review later in the week. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you like this content and want to see more of it, you may want to hit that subscribe button on the left-hand side. If you like this video and want to see more of this content, take a look at this video on the left-hand side as well. And if you missed my last video, take a look at the right-hand side. Once again, thanks for watching, and keep on gaming.